Welcome to the Human Reboot with me, Emma Last. We have uplifting, inspiring, and diverse reboot stories from people sharing the courageous, honest, authentic, and sometimes difficult life lessons. The Human Reboot will provide proven mentally flourishing formulas and practical tips to help you to live life to the full, giving you direction and hope. Make your mental fitness and well-being a daily priority. Learn to pause so that you can get clear and perform at your best. Switch off to switch on. It's time for your Human Reboot. Today on the Human Reboot podcast, it's little old me. It's just me, Emma Last. And what I'm going to be talking to you today are about the reflections and key learns over the last 10 or so episodes. I'm going to start with episode 12. Episode 12 was all about us as ladies playing bigger. So let's play bigger, ladies, with Emma Clayton. There was some real interesting things that came out of this episode. And actually, some of it was quite, when you start thinking about it, it makes you feel quite disappointed. Like when we've been through the pandemic and we were in lockdown, there seems to be real patterns of women going back to the 1930s, where we put kind of our businesses on hold and we were trying to homeschool the kids and we were trying to juggle everything all at the same time to really support our families. And what's really, really interesting is actually now, if you start to look at some of the statistics around mental health and well-being, actually the pandemic has affected women, most women, more severely than it has men. Well, we can say that, but sometimes the big question around that is, as women, are we actually reporting things more than men do? But it does seem like there was a real kind of pressure on us as women to be able to kind of do it all and juggle it all. And this episode does kind of go into that, which is great to acknowledge that, that did happen. And actually, if that was you, you're not on your own. And we can't be all things to everybody. And actually that has had quite an impact on a number of women's mental health and well-being, because, actually taking time for ourselves and being able to, get back to, being able to give ourselves some time or some self-care for some people has been really quite difficult. And I know that many people have actually, found that this September has been the first time when their children have kind of gone back to school and everything's opened up again, where they're really starting to transition into some sort of routine, when everything has been kind of ever changing really over the last sort of 17 months. But one of the other key things that came out of this episode was that in 2019, the Rose Report stated that there was only 17% of businesses in the UK that were female owned. And thankfully now there's been an update, and 34% of businesses are female owned. Now, the big thing around that is that when you look at the number of people employed within those businesses, there's a lot of women that have set up businesses and they're solopreneurs, and they're not necessarily kind of thinking as big or perhaps accessing as much investment maybe as they could do to grow their businesses as quickly as they could. So a lot of the things within this episode are very much about, really, really about starting to think a little bit differently and trying to remove some of those barriers. We might slow ourselves down when there are opportunities to speed ourselves up, not necessarily having to do everything on our own, and with some investment that and some headcount, we're able to kind of grow our business more quickly. So it's a great episode, but those were a couple of really key things that came out of it. Episode 13, My 2020, Our Stories of Strength and Resilience with Jo Howarth. That was actually around the launch of our book launch, which so earlier this year or late last year, I was asked to be involved in a book collaboration about stories of strength and resilience through the pandemic. And both myself and Jo Howarth were involved in that. And, fortunately, we got to #1. So I'm now a #1 best-selling co-author on Amazon, which is great. Jo talks about talks about gratefulness. She talks about journaling. She talks about transition. She talks about the amazing woman that came to her rescue around, when she was really kind of struggling and wondering whether she was actually even going to carry on with her business, which would have been an absolute travesty. But she talks about her journey from when her dad passed away right through to becoming, discovering mindfulness and becoming a mindfulness practitioner, kind of thinking, what is this thing that everybody's going on about? And thinking, well, I think I need to learn more. And then when she learned more, having this huge light bulb moment and saying, I actually really get it now. And one of the other key learns that really came out of it was around the word selfish. So when we talk about self-care, naturally we often feel inside those feelings of selfishness. And when we started to talk about kind of the description of selfish, Jo said, we've given the word selfish this huge negative connotation, but actually, if you look at it as the word selfish, it just means of the self, in and of itself. It doesn't have to be a negative connotation. We've given it one. We've said that being selfish is wrong, but actually, it's absolutely right. And we should all be more selfish. We need to start with ourselves. When you put yourself first, when you look after your needs, your boundaries, your values, when you adhere to what you believe is important in life and what you need as a human being to live, the life you want to live then spreads out from you to everyone around you, which I absolutely loved. Well, the next episode was a little bit different. So this was with Pete Cann, the laughter man. And Pete talks about how laughing for 10 minutes a day is his real secret weapon. Pete very vulnerably shares how a couple of points in his life he's felt really quite broken, that have been really, really challenging. And he got to a point where he didn't know whether he could carry on. And he talks about his journey back from those thoughts and those feelings. And he talks about how he found laughter yoga. So after doing 4 days of laughing every day, I felt amazing. I felt really energized. I felt really focused, and I felt creative. I just knew what I wanted to do more of in my life. And that was laughing. And laughing every day with a group of people for 10 minutes, he found was his real secret weapon, and has been a huge support to him through the pandemic. So his story is one of vulnerability, but one of strength, one of business, and one of laughter. And he talks about his morning routine as well, and the support he got from the book, The Miracle Morning by Hal Elrod, which I know is a book that has come up very often in the podcast recommendations. Episode 15. So this was with one of my good friends, Becky Holmes. And this was 1 in 20 women suffer from my hormone disorder, PMDD. Now, I'm really glad to say that since this episode, Becky has had further treatment and literally it's been life-changing for her. Although it was a massive decision for her to be able to move forward with her life, and a huge decision to, to have a hysterectomy. Literally, she feels like herself every day. But when we talked in this episode, and we talked about 1 in 20 women suffering from premenstrual dysphoric disorder, that's PMDD, where every month they become pretty ill. The episode talks about, even though Becky's a high achiever, she's had to learn to slow down, to work with her illness and accept what she needs to do to support herself through her illness every month. And, she shares how her brain reacts differently to the fluctuation of hormones, and really how she tries to manage and live her life around her illness. In conversations I've had with her since then, she said to me that she would have planned her month. If someone asked her to go out somewhere, or to do something, or to meet her, or to work on a project, she would have to look at her diary and look at how her cycle impacted around that time she was being asked to do something. And now she doesn't have to do that. So that's absolutely amazing. So I just wanted to share that little bit of hope for people that may be going through that. But it's a great episode. And I had a great message of support from somebody saying that, and this happened last year when we went live on a Facebook Live and talked about it. And I had a message from someone just saying, I think that's me. I think I need to, reach out for some help. I think that could be me. I think I've been living with this for, a huge part of my life. And, the stats are 1 in 20 women, but there could be even more if people don't know about it. So if you think that could be you, please listen to this episode. Something that really came out of this episode was that although that Becky's been through so much with this, she's really started to see it as a gift, because it's actually helped to become much more of an empathetic person. She's more understanding of what other people are going through, which means it really has given her gifts as well, as hard as it has been. And she feels that she would have been a different person had she not been through it. But the other part for me is really around the self-care part, where she knows that she has to work within her limits. And actually, those limits are like boundaries for all of us, that we need to know what our boundaries are, what we can do and what we can work within, and so that we can flourish. And I'm glad to say that Becky has really gone on to flourish, go from strength to strength. And actually, I'd love to have her back as a guest so that she can talk us through the next stages of her recovery. The next episode was with the absolutely gorgeous Valerie Fischer. This was episode 16, and it was around rejection gave me the redirection to find my strengths. Now, Valerie came from quite a poor family, and she'd always kind of used her talent and working hard to get her to the places that she had in her life, in terms of getting herself an education that was funded. And, and has really kind of used that, if I work hard enough, I can be whatever I want to be. And kind of as being on that career ladder, thinking that that's where she wanted to be, progressing to that position that she thought she wanted to be in. And there was so many sort of similarities between some of that conversations and some of the feelings that I'd had before. But like me, and like Valerie, she took the time to step back and really evaluate what she really wanted. But it was after she was rejected, really, from the job that she had loved. It was her ideal job, and it was in the times of COVID, and there came a situation where it was, she was kind of made redundant from that position, and actually having to kind of rethink about what she wanted and rewire really brought her back to actually how did she want to reboot her life and what direction did she want to go in. And there's just some real things that came out of it about, really finding your strengths, living life authentically, accepting who you really are, and, really opening up to the doors that are really meant for you. And we talked quite a lot in this we talked about starting with why, Simon Sinek's book, and how Valerie really worked around that for a couple of years to really work out what her why was, so that she had a real formula to guide herself and to inspire courage and create change. And then really around, how she's translated that into purpose, and so that she can drive, her career forward in the path she has now chosen, which is actually working as an entrepreneur. The next episode was with Anna Davidson. So this was episode 17. And this was about from domestic abuse to freedom in love, freedom in money, and freedom in mind. Myself and Anna went to secondary school together, so have known each other for a long time. But the episode was quite difficult to listen to in parts. May have been difficult for some listeners. Anna has got, years of experience in e-commerce and digital marketing, and she's so highly successful. She's, she was featured in Forbes last year. However, there was a number of years of her life where she's had to spend time freeing herself from an abusive marriage, freeing herself from domestic violence. And she talks about her journey from fear and shame to wanting to get help for her partner, to the point where she knew that she couldn't fix it, and to finding safety for herself and her boys, and then really how she worked on her self-healing, her self-care, and now how she has truly found her freedom. So that journey and that story and Anna's reboot started where she was living for 6 months with a bag in the back of her car and a spare pair of clothes and the boys' passports, ready to leave if she had to. Right through to actually how she was going to kind of make those changes, how she was going to be kind of brave enough to make that decision to, walk away from the relationship when she thought for so long that, that she could fix it and she wanted to fix it. She talks about her denial and then talks about her exit strategy, and then all about her recovery, how she had a great counsellor and how she really started to kind of work on herself before she was able to start really moving forward. But how that counsellor had really got her to think differently, and to the point where she said, I think everyone should have a counsellor or coach or a mentor or someone like that, because I think we're always growing and we can't always see things ourselves. And everyone needs some kind of support, especially with what's happened in the last 12 months in the pandemic. I found this episode really inspirational. And, you know, Anna is, she's a phenomenal lady. So if you've not listened to the episode, give it a listen. The next episode was with Gary Parsons. I met Gary earlier this year. It was actually on Clubhouse, and I think within us being in a few rooms together, over a few hours, I was just like, this man is amazing. His values are so similar to mine. And I think I even said to him, Gary, you know, I love you. You're great. You're amazing. So I was so pleased when he came on to do this episode. The episode is called Why You Should Be a Human Leader. Now, Gary talks about the reboots within his business and how he made the sacrifices he made when he first started his business. We talk about kind of him growing his business through a recession and then through a pandemic. We talk about how he's always put people first, and he believes this has really been key to their success, both internally within their teams and also with their clients. We discuss having a specialism over niching. We discuss humility, leaders being able to be more vulnerable about their mental health and well-being, and people over profit. Gary said was the link between people and profit. You can't have one without the other. And if you treat people as humans and treat them with the respect and humility that you would expect to be treated yourself, then you will unlock that profit. It will happen. It's about focusing on that culture we create, on our people first, and making sure that we support our people to perform at their best. And, you know, it is a fine balance, isn't it? Because it's like, well, if you've not got a strategy, then you've not really got a business. And if you've not got people, you can have a strategy, but you can't make it happen. And I think this episode balances the two beautifully. And we really have, you know, we've had some really great conversations about, you know, about that balance between the two. And also around actually how we balance it ourselves as leaders, and how we take a break and how we look after ourselves. There seems to be definitely a theme that runs through many of the Human Reboot podcast episodes around this, where we have high achievers that may have boundaries in place, but sometimes we kind of give those boundaries a bit of a nudge out of the way. One of the things that Gary left us with at the end of the episode, towards the end of the episode, was how often do we sit there and talk about our employees and talk about where they want to be in 5 years and their career plans, but rarely do we say what matters to you, what values have you got as an individual outside of work that matter to you? How can we support you on your journey? And how do you talk about that with your friends and your family? And he really believes that we have a duty to be able to do that first. And actually, if you think about it, if you can connect the two between this career plan and the values and what's important to someone, then surely they're going to achieve that plan, that career plan, more quickly and more readily if it links to really the life that they want to lead. And also it will help them to make the right decisions about when they do need to pause and when they do need to rest. Episode 19. So that was Everybody is Deserving of Good Things, Including Me, with Collette Stevenson. Now, I've known Collette since 2019 at some point. And Collette is a wonderful lady. And when she said to me she wanted to come on and tell her story, I didn't know what that story was going to be. And actually, she shared a story so vulnerable about how she was assaulted when she was younger, and the effect that that has had on her life and on some of the decisions that she made, and feelings of or not feeling that she is deserving of good things happening to her. She tells a story over this episode, and she tells about how a dream shaped some decision making in her life, and how she knew that following that dream she couldn't go back. She knew she had to make a change, and she made the decision to move out to a different country. And in that country, that's where she met her other half. It was Japan. And that's actually where she had her baby. And she got married, and they came back to the UK. But that wasn't without its real challenges. And Collette shares that part of her journey as well, how they were really struggling financially, and how she really, really believes that by putting one foot in front of the other, that was really just knowing that putting one foot in front of the other and making small steps had a huge, huge impact on her getting through those challenges. She also talks about ADHD and neurodiversity, and then goes on to talk about how her life has really started to flourish. She's a really inspiring lady. She's very down to earth, and she is a true creative. So if you have missed this episode, take a little look. The next episode is episode 20, and this was with a lady called Joanna Rawbone. And this was all about how introverts can flourish without pretending. And I found it so interesting, because she talked about her reboot story, where for years she was a corporate trainer, where for years that she had really been kind of performing and acting in the way that she thought that she must do to be able to compete in that corporate environment. And she goes on to tell her story about how she rebooted and how she learned more about herself, how she learned about the fact that she was an introvert and what that meant. And it didn't mean to say that she didn't like being around, wasn't that she didn't like being around people, but it was that she got her energy in a different way. And I found this episode so interesting, because even for those people that may be extroverts, over the last sort of 17 months, we have had to find ways of getting our energy in different ways. And I think this episode is helpful not only to introverts, but is helpful to extroverts too. But what is really interesting about it is Joanna is trying to educate and support corporate organizations to understand the difference in perhaps how introverts may communicate, to understand the needs of introverts, so that actually that their talent isn't missed. So it's not, well, you didn't participate in that discussion because you were thinking, digesting, reflecting and coming up with different ideas that potentially you would go back with, but you needed a little bit more time to absorb it. rather than jumping in with 2 feet. And I just found this episode just really helpful in terms of understanding myself a little bit more, but also understanding other people. And I could really kind of put myself back in that boardroom and think about the people around the table, you know, tables over many years, and thinking, you know, I wonder if they were more introverted. The next episode was with Bernii Mac, and it was episode 21, and it was called EMDR was game changing for my PTSD and anxiety. This episode was really important to me because when I've been delivering training over the last, few years around mental health and well-being, what I've found really interesting is that sometimes people, will come on and say, oh, well, I had PTSD, but I had this amazing treatment. And I've never really fully understood what it is. And I've, slowly and slowly been kind of reading more into it. But Bernii has actually been through that treatment herself. Bernii talks about her journey. She's a singer-songwriter, and she tells her story of when she went from a 15-year-old starting out in the music industry, falling into an abusive relationship that led to her making poor decisions for her. Then she talks about living with generalized anxiety disorder, and then right through to a PTSD diagnosis. She talks us through the EMDR therapy that she had and how it helped. And I think the key thing for me around this was that, and the real takeaway was that EMDR, a lot of people think it's about a light kind of whizzing across the screen and you following that light. But there was also kind of, there's different ways you can follow a finger. You can have little beats in your ears. I think that you can use tapping as a form of it as well, what I've read since this. But the key part is and a lot of people perhaps would be frightened to go and kind of explore this treatment because they think, well, I've got to go over and over what happened in whatever has caused me, the post-traumatic stress. But actually, the way that Bernii talks in this episode is very much around the feelings. So it's about dealing with the feelings that come from the trauma. So I really thank her for sharing all that information with us. The next episode was episode 22. No matter what your diversity, everyone deserves to belong. This was with the very amazing Becky Kekula. She is an international TEDx speaker. She's a motivational speaker. She massively champions equality and equity in disability. And she talks about not only her story, but about the impact that she's trying to have on the world by sharing and educating information around disability. So Becky is a person with dwarfism and thus identifies as having a physical disability. But she talks about the challenges of her getting her first job and how she's gone on to really learn from each environment, how she's always wanted to have a really big impact, but sometimes that's really difficult because sometimes she's felt that people have wanted her there and some people haven't. It seems now that, she really has found her place in the world and working for a disability like inclusion charity, well, not for profit. And also she works as a speaker as well. But there was a few things that really came out of this episode that really kind of touched me. And one was that she never really asked for any adjustments because she didn't really want that to affect the decision-making process about whether she got that job or whether she retained that job or whether it would affect her opportunities going forward in her career. But she talks about when she went into one job and they sorted, they got her a step stool for a desk, and and in the kitchen and in the toilet, and just kind of made the adjustments that they could make. And then they started to go more over and above, and how this massively pleased her. So she didn't ask for it, but this was just something a director once woke up and in the morning and thought, but what if Becky wanted to use a different kitchen or a different bathroom? And how nice it is that when somebody thinks of something that perhaps you haven't thought of yourself. The other part that we talked a lot about was around the connection between mental health and disability. And this was a great conversation. And really, some of the things that Becky said in this episode, it's heartbreaking to think that people have to go through those barriers every day. So whatever your diversity, you have to go through extra barriers compared to other people. And actually, if there are things that we can do to make things more equitable, then we should try and do that, because it's not only helping you with the barrier of your disability, for example, but also we're preventing and doing what we can to reduce the stress that somebody's going through. And we all know that ongoing stress can lead to mental illness. So this is something that, we do really need to consider in the world, in the work that we're doing, and how we accommodate people that may be different to ourselves, and that everybody does deserve to belong. I loved that Becky, at the end of this episode, says, "I truly believe anything's possible, and people may laugh, but I'm willing to challenge anyone anytime someone tells me that it isn't." And her mindset is phenomenal. She really is. She's an amazing lady. And, the whole thoughts of being able to include people and to change the fact that, where she talks about in this episode, she talks about we have potential to do great things, even if others try to tear us down in the process. Yes, there are people in this world that are like that, but it shouldn't be any more difficult for someone with a disability than it is with someone that isn't. We should be trying to create a world where people can perform at their best and find their talents and rise to the challenges that they want to, to rise to in their lives. So I just wanted to say a massive thank you to my guests that have helped me over the last 10 or so episodes. I've loved doing these. And if you want to know more about rebooting and what it really means, and what are the key steps that actually help someone to reboot quickly and effectively, to help them to deal with any stresses or mental health illnesses, to grow their mental fitness and resilience, and help them to adapt to challenge and change, then please get in touch. I will be happy to share my methodology. Thank you for listening to the Human Reboot podcast. I'm Emma Last, and if you've enjoyed this episode, please leave me a 5-star podcast review and visit thehumanrebootmovement.com, where you can find downloadable free resources, sign up to my mailing list, or connect with me on social. So that's thehumanrebootmovement.com. Let's switch off so we can switch on. It's time for your human reboot.